Day 126 to 9:23 a.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Early in the morning, everyone woke up receiving a piece of bad news. The tribe elder had passed away. Mark, who was the owner of this base, organized an emergency meeting during breakfast. The passing of the elder was the first news that he brought to them. She, who guided the remaining members of her tribe to safety, had finally reached the end of the line. Nevertheless, even though no one meant it in the wrong way, many people in the base were curious as to how the elder lasted this long. Although no one asked, her appearance could tell anyone that she must have passed 100 years old already even before the outbreak came. After all, not everyone was able to see what was the actual reason. One of the things that entered everyone's mind, however, was the fact that the elder was the very first death among the members of the base since Mark established the base. Nonetheless, no one could decide whether this was a bad or a good thing. It was a bad thing because the elder left her loved ones, especially her grandchildren. On the other hand, she did not have to worry anymore about surviving in this world. The world was already moving towards destruction. Anyone could die anything. In the least, she did not die being torn apart by the teeth of the infected. She died with her loved ones beside her, unlike the families of almost everyone here. None of them even knew whether their loved ones that died still had their bodies intact. Everyone wanted to do a funeral for the elder. Unfortunately, they did not know whether their current situation would allow it. In the meeting, Mark did not hide that the enemies might be attacking today. This added to the tension that everyone felt from the death of the elder. Furthermore, Mark already told them that everyone, except the children and elderly, would be participating in this battle. It was to give everyone a good experience in defending the base. But in the middle of Mark's announcement, he suddenly said that everyone except for some selected people would be retreating inside the space of the spirit tree. The subspace existing inside Chio was not new to them. In fact, everyone here had already entered it since they started to build things inside, following Mark's instructions. However, for the former plans to be changed at the last minute, everyone felt that something was not right. It was not hard to guess that something was going on. However, Mark decided to hide the details of this one and did not say anything instead. Nevertheless, many felt relieved. It was because these ones were unlike the people close to Mark. They were already trained to fight and had some experiences. On the other hand, while the majority of the people in the base only managed to live by being slaves, they were protected by their owners as property and manpower. And after the announcement, there was no time to waste. Everyone was told to prepare to evacuate and transport most of the things into the subspace. Thus, everyone became more active than any of the days they had in their lives. It was as if the scene of evacuation when a typhoon was coming repeated itself in the apocalypse. Everyone here knew that Mark and his team were fierce, but if they said that everyone should evacuate despite their presence, the situation might really be dangerous. Thus, no one held back in preparing to leave. Mark watched the situation as he made his way back to the elder's dwelling. Without any place or time for a funeral, the elder's body still lay on her bed. May came with Mark this time, quietly walking beside him. The loss of the elder was the loss of a great asset. Despite being cryptic, her oracles could warn the base against danger. In respect to the elder, Mark decided on something. Mark did not know whether it would be an honor or not, however, it was the best that he could treat the deceased old woman. She was to be buried inside the subspace of the night-evered spirit tree, forever protected from everything as long as the tree continued to exist. Mark entered the room. It was being guarded by the remaining members of their tribe. They bowed their heads upon Mark and May's entry. At the bed that could be seen in the entrance, the body of the elder could be seen. She was now dressed in different clothing and was surely cleaned diligently. Not even a trace of blood could be seen around despite what happened last night when the elder coughed out blood, staining her clothes, the floor, and the bed. Mark looked at the granddaughter whose eyes were not only swelling but was also a bit dark. It was very likely that she did not sleep a wink at all and took care of everything. As for her brother, it seemed that he was tired of crying. He was lying down on the bed beside her. Without saying anything, Mark and May walked towards the body of the elder. No one said anything, either, and just watched. But then, Mark held his hand towards the forehead of the deceased tribe elder. Then, the wind swirled around inside the room as if someone suddenly turned on an industrial fan. Every cloth in the room fluttered with the wind. The wind surged with Mark and the elder at the center. Although it was not present on his face, Mark was also quite surprised at the current phenomenon. Although he had done this before, this was the first time that something like this happened. It was no different. Using an empty mental crystal, he was taking out the elder's oracle ability from her corpse before it dissipated. He could have done it last night. Although he was not sure if he was able to take it, he could at least try. However, he decided to do it after the elder died. This ability that ran through their blood was the one that tried to maintain her life. If he chose to do it last night and succeeded, it would immediately end her life. That would be unfair for her 2 grandchildren that she would leave behind. But then, crack, the crystal on his hand shattered. Mark frowned. Sure enough, the elder's ability was different from normal ones. Taking another, empty mental crystal, he tried once more. Crack. The second crystal also shattered into pieces. 2 marble-sized crystals already shattered to dust. If the spirit races knew of this, they would surely cry. Even gods seemed to value it, but 2 large pieces of it shattered into nothingness. Despite that, Mark did not give up. He took out 7 crystals in one go. Mark wanted to see if a single crystal was not enough, or it was just hard to succeed in getting this power. And then, the wind intensified further. It was too strong that it started to knock things over. Then, a different reaction happened. 6 crystals shone and flew in the air, leaving one on Mark's hand. They started to glow brightly and spun all together, like a group of dancers. The spectacle amazed everyone. Even the tribe members outside could not help but open the door and come in a hurry because of the noises inside the room. The 6 crystals continued to spin in a circle for a whole minute already while everyone stared and waited. They all floated above the elder's forehead while dancing in the air. Then, slowly, the 6 crystals started to close into each other. The circle started to shrink as the crystals began to spin faster. Shoom! With a bright light that made everyone cover their eyes, the 6 crystals combined. The next thing that they saw was a bright red crystal with a glowing golden orb inside floating above the elder's face. Seeing that it succeeded, Mark was glad. He wasted some crystals, but it should be worth it. He was about to grab it when something unnatural happened. A hazy red string started to appear connected to the crystal. As for the other end of it, no one knew as it vanished midway the ceiling. Nevertheless, Mark knew the string had to end somewhere. It was because whatever it was, the crystal was getting dragged by it somewhere. Mark hurriedly grabbed the crystal and pulled it. However, it was as if the crystal was affixed in the air and refused to budge. Slowly, it was floating away, even staring to drag Mark with it. Something was absolutely wrong. Not giving up on trying to drag the crystal, Mark racked his brains out. Even May grabbed onto him and started to pull. Nevertheless, even with the strength of 2 pure blood demons, they failed to resist the force pulling the crystal away. Mark started to use his full strength as the veins on his body glowed brightly. May was the same as she even opened her wings. It was futile, however. The crystal was still being dragged away. Mark then sent a surge of miasma to envelop the hazy string. If this string was made of energy, his miasma should be able to absorb it. Unexpectedly, the surge of miasma passed through the string as if it was not there at all. Now that Mark noticed, even though he was holding onto the crystal, the string was passing through his fist. It was an ethereal existence that no one seemed to be able to touch. But then, a surprising help came. Mayumi, the elder's granddaughter, charged towards the crystal. Grabbing onto Mark's hand, she also pulled, but then, Mark and Mayumi reacted at the same time. Not because she grabbed onto Mark's hand, but because her hand hit the string and did not pass through. Seeing that, Mark immediately shouted, "Quick! Grab the string and try to tear it apart." Hearing that, Mayumi immediately climbed up the bed of her deceased grandmother and jumped towards the string. Grabbing with both hands, she tried to tear it apart. She managed to grab it, however, it seemed that there was no way of tearing or cutting it. But Mayumi was not giving up. She knew what those crystals meant, and this one was definitely her grandmother's powers. There was no way for her to give up on something that her grandmother should leave behind. Thus, with all her might, she pulled the string apart. She did it too hard that her hands started to bleed. The blood from her hands started to flow down the string and dripped on Mark's hands. As there was no time to wipe it away, Mark just let it flow. Then, the blood touched the crystal. The moment that it happened, the force tugging them started to weaken. Slowly, the red string started to dissipate. Without the string, Mayumi, who was hanging onto it, fell down. Mark and May, on the other hand, managed to stabilize themselves and did not fall by accident. However, it was not finished. With another flash of bright light, Mark's hand was forced open. The crystal then flew towards Mayumi and rested on her hand. It looked like the crystal knew who it should belong to. But of course, Mayumi was still not of age. She was not able to absorb it, like how she was still ineligible to inherit it from her grandmother. Sitting on the ground, Mayumi smiled. She looked at the crystal on her hand and her deceased grandmother. "Don't worry, grandmother. Our family's legacy will not end on you as you are worried about. I will continue it," she said with tears on the corner of her eyes. That was tiring. Mark shrugged. His forehead was kind of sweaty. It would be a lie if he said that he was not worried about what happened. Not only that, it would be a waste, but the fear of the elder might really happen. Luckily, the key was the blood of her granddaughter. No matter how anyone looked at it, this ability only belonged to their family. Day 126 to 1:21 p.m. Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. The time that the Fa copyright Fada would vanish was about to come. The vortex of energy that kept the magical veil of fog was about to stop turning. In another hour or two, it would completely vanish. It was a well-calculated plan, because by the time that the Fa copyright Fada vanished, the Ouroboros China branch was already ready to start their siege. At this moment, an army composed of 150 robed people, 500, level 3, mutated infected, and 200 humans gathered outside the veil of fog. Compared to the estimated number of people who resided at the base that they were going to attack, it was complete overkill. If it was an online game, it was comparable to a large guild attacking a small one, trying to overwhelm them using numbers. But of course, it was a show of intimidation. This number was not only to slaughter but to force the enemy to submit without a fight. If not, it was also a method to reduce the morale of the enemy. Anyone who lived in the era of war knew how important morale was to soldiers. Comparing a whole 100 army of soldiers with no confidence or enthusiasm to fight was way worse than half of the number who were ready to die in a fight. The battle of morale was the first battle that commanders would face first. That was why hair-raising speeches were regular before an army departed into war. It was to raise the morale of their army, to heighten their desire and enthusiasm to win. Without it, fighting an army of the same number, despite higher skills, might lead to a losing battle. But of course, that was not only the leader of this army, Tan Saitong, was thinking. At first, they thought that it would be enough to send a smaller army and surround the strange base under the spirit tree. However, the unknown factor that managed to get in and out of Fa copyright Fada appeared. It made the Tan Sishan decide to increase the size of his army by capturing people from the settlement in Infant. But who would have thought that it did not only lure out the unknown factor but the wanted child from the Super Soldier project decades ago also appeared? Because of that, not only they failed the mission, but Huo Long Yu was severely injured, and they lost a third of the people they sent to that mission. Fortunately, Huo Long Yu managed to carry the 2 disabled Zhongas back, or it would be an irreplaceable loss. These Zhongas were not like the others. They were dead bodies of martial arts experts in the past eras. No matter how many they create at this point, they would never compare to these Zhongas cultivated for decades. Even though they could create new ones having bodies of mutators, the skill and reflex would not be present. That was one of the downsides of these corpses. Although they retained their abilities from when they were still alive, they could not improve or train anymore. That was why they needed dead bodies of experienced people more than ones that had just gained their abilities. And now, even though Huo Long Yu lost one of his arms, he was rearing to fight. The two Jiangshis he brought back last night were also ready to fight. The army, led by Tan Saitong, started to get into position. They needed to finish their preparations by the time that the Fa copyright Fada vanished. The robed soldiers immediately moved. As for the humans among them, however, they had worried expressions on their faces. The members of Ouroboros forced them to come here. Even though they failed in getting any from the Infanta settlement, it did not mean that they had no other places to get more. Among these people, only 20 were members of Ouroboros. As for the others, they were nothing but sacrificial pawns that did not even know why they were here. Almost all of them were non-combatants, to begin with, and some of them were children. Tan Saitong, together with his aides, sat on top of an elevated area of the mountain, overseeing the whole battlefield. With the looks of his face, it seemed that he was confident about winning this. It was despite the presence of the mysterious man that cut off Huo Long Yu's arm. Tan Saitong might be respectable in terms of leadership. Outside that, however, he looked down on everything. His enemies were not an exception. It was not like he was underestimating their skills but was just his usual behavior. Furthermore, from the display that the mysterious man did, just 4 of his aides should be able to handle him. Of course, Tan Saitong did not entirely believe something that he had not seen. As such, he had some plans hidden just in case. After all, they were still in the dark as to who was the master of the spirit tree. If it was true that man was the master, they had to prepare. They were in the middle of getting ready to surround the whole area. Unfortunately, the entire future messed up. Things were not going to go the way they wanted. To their surprise, black smoke slowly mixed with the Fa copyright Fada, swirling around, dragging the mist with it. Chaya did not wait for their leader's command and issued a retreat to the people assigned to her immediately. They were designated to block the southern area of the base, and they were the closest to Fa copyright Fada. However, it was too late for those who were the nearest to the veil of fog. As the black smoke swirled, surges of it swallowed those were near. The shadow people, whose bodies made with nothing but magical energy, left nothing but their robes behind. Tan Saitong immediately stood up from his seat, surprised as to what was happening. What surprised him, even more, was what happened to the shadow people consumed by the black smoke. Miasma. Of course, Tan Saitong would be surprised. For more than 200 years that he lived, died, and lived once more, there were only several instances that miasma could appear. One was a formless demon, who was as rare as the blue moon. Once they appeared, a large-scale catastrophe and slaughter would happen. These creatures were not allowed to grow, and even their organization would try to eliminate such beings instead of recruiting them. Another was if an archdemon appeared. The evil energy these demons had could corrupt the surroundings. Magical energy sources corrupted by the evil energy could run amok, scattering miasma around it. As for the most common one, it was the same as what happened to magical energy sources when corrupted, but more naturally. Sometimes impurities in these magical sources could change its nature in a good or bad way. Worse, it could turn corrupted and release miasma instead. With those 3 listed, there were still others that were less more frequent to happen. It was like a single comet passing near Earth twice. Nevertheless, while an archdemon appearing was not unlikely, Tan Saitong was sure that it would not happen that easily. The spirit world had 2 divisions, after all. Then, there was only one possibility in Tan Stong's mind. The thing that they came here for, the spirit tree, became corrupted. Spirit trees were not only magical trees. They release magical energy as a source as well. Or else, how would cities built under these trees flourish faster compared to those that did not? Tan Sishan frowned. What bad luck, he said as he thought of that reason. After all, They came here for the spirit tree. Also the source of that metal used by that base under it. If the spirit tree had become corrupted, all the preparations they made would have gone to waste. Furthermore, as the Fa copyright Th Fada trapped everything inside, it was very likely that everyone inside was gone. Retreat. Do not let the miasma hit anyone. Tan Saitong shouted in a loud voice that echoed across the field. He declared what the black smoke was and that the mission was a failure. Standing behind the ranks, however, Huo Longyu did not think the same. He reported about the mysterious man appearing like mist and hurling black smoke towards them the previous night. They had thought that it was just the man's ability. But seeing this now, Huo Longyu felt the same feeling as he had last night. He could not be sure as he had not really seen miasma before, as it was quite rare. Opportunities and danger alike, one could only encounter one by chance. Still, he could not shake the feeling. Thus, he decided to leave his post and tell their leader. "Sorry, but I can't let you." A voice echoed from his side, making him take a defensive stance immediately. However, it was too late. He turned his head as he saw the blade of the strange western sword approaching his neck. There was no time to dodge it. He could not defend either as the attack came from the direction of his severed arm. The only thing he could do was to use a defensive art to use his inner force to strengthen his muscles. Concentrating it on his neck, the skin around his neck released a metallic hue. And then, his eyes turned wide. With a black fire on the blade of the sword, the inner force he used to defend his neck was consumed instantly. Huo Longyu's neck was sliced off like tofu. As his head flew off, the only thing he saw was the mysterious man holding that strange sword while wearing the same robe as everyone else in Ouroboros. The only thing different was a crystal floating in front of him, releasing a bright glow. They have been had. The enemies were not inside Fa copyright Th Fada but within their ranks. A loud thud was heard, and the members of Ouroboros in front of Huo Longyu looked behind them. And they saw nothing. They noticed that Huo Longyu was gone. However, it was not new to them that the crazy dragon would leave without saying anything. Thus, they returned their attention to the front. Unknown to them, Huo Longyu was still there with the assailant, standing in front of them without any of them seeing. The assailant, Mark, snicked at the reactions of the members of Ouroboros. Huo Longyu was an eccentric person. And his eccentricity backfired here. If not, anyone would surely report his disappearance immediately. As Mark could not leave the body behind, he pulled his left sleeve, revealing his hand that now had 2 rings. One looked ancient while the other was beautiful with a black gem. Pouring some energy on the ring, he touched Huo Longyu's dead body. Suddenly, it vanished, leaving nothing but some stains of blood on the ground. Then, Mark left as if nothing happened. At this time, the miasma finally finished absorbing the Fa copyright Th Fada. It soon vanished along with the veil of fog, revealing the scene inside. But then, they saw nothing. All there was a vacant piece of land. The spirit tree was not here, nor the base that existed before. There were still marks as to where it stood. However, nothing stood on it anymore. "Go. Investigate," Tan Saitong shouted. Then he called the commanders. Chaya. Long Yu. As soon as she was called, Chaya vanished in her station and appeared in front of Tan Saitong. However, Huo Long Yu did not appear. "Where is Long Yu?" Tan Saitong shouted furiously. Then, someone reported, "Sire, Huo Long Yu is missing again." "That crazy bastard." "Forget it." Tan Saitong rubbed his forehead. Then, he turned to Chaya. "You go and lead the investigation. Be careful. I feel that something is not right here." "Yes. As you command." Chaya vanished and appeared in front of her troops. With her lead, they rushed towards the area where the base should be located before. It was the worst decision. From multiple unseen sources, projectiles flew from everywhere. Chaya and her troops, who were the closest, caught most of it. Day 126 to 1:31 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, caisson. A large number of projectiles flew towards the members of the group tasked to investigate. Since Chaya led this group, they were all shadow people, and thus, they disregarded the projectiles flying towards them even though they saw them coming. Human weapons would not harm them, even regular bullets or explosions would not, despite ruining their robes. Their bodies were ethereal and were untouchable without their consent. Only special bullets and weapons could harm them. And those projectiles flying towards them were nothing but wooden arrows. There was not even a metal tip on them. Of course, the shadow people would not pay it any attention. That was the second mistake. Chaya, who had a higher danger awareness, did not feel right and immediately hid in the shadows. As the attack came too suddenly and unexpectedly, she had no time to warn her soldiers. And thus, the arrows flew through the shadow people's bodies, tearing their bodies apart, giving them the shock of their lives before their deaths. Aside from the commander, Chaya, the whole group sent to investigate turned to dust, leaving nothing but their torn robes behind. Standing behind the ranks of the enemies, Mark smirked. Taking the enemies by surprise was a hard tactic. After all, they were veterans of the conflict, being an organization hiding in the darkness of human society. Thus, he had to think of a way to surprise them. Mark started it with the miasma eating away the thing they called fa copyright th fada. The magical veil of an old tribe in Irish folklore. Who would think that miasma would suddenly erupt and consume the magical energy of the mist before them on a large scale? Thus, not only it terrified them, but also caused their attention to focus on the situation. Having the enemy's attention elsewhere made it easier for him to assassinate Huo Long Yu. Mark's emphatic detection covered the whole area, and Huo Long Yu was the only one who showed a sign of realization. Initially, Mark wanted to capture him alive. Chinese cultivation methods known since ancient times was something that would interest him. Unfortunately, the crazy dragon realized something after experiencing the battle last night. And since cultivators had many surprising trump cards, they usually hid, it was better to kill him as fast as possible lest he tried something that would hinder his plans. Then, after killing the rogue cultivator, next were removing the miasma in an unexpected way and the vanishing act of the base. Miasma would linger and spread. That was how it usually worked. However, for both the miasma and the base vanishing like that, the enemies would surely send people to investigate. People who were untouchable and should be able to dodge regular dangers, the shadow people. Unfortunately for them, the wooden arrows they belittled had tips made from the core of the dying spirit tree. In other words, it was a waste of resources, using a valuable magical material for disposable projectile weapons. Nevertheless, it was worthwhile. The group of 40 people sent to investigate vanished with only one person surviving the assault. It was quite a substantial blow to the enemy, considering that the actual battle had yet to start. Then, while everyone was still shocked at that scene, the arrows that targeted the group sent to investigate flew towards them. However, as they already saw it before, only a little number was hit by the arrows. Furthermore, only fewer died. Bang! Then, the sound of a sniper rifle echoed out of nowhere. A bullet flew, tearing the bodies several shadow people at once. Many froze to that sight. At first, it was just arrows. Now, a sniper bullet came out of nowhere. Fearing that they also had other weapons like that, everyone rushed to find cover. Mark looked at the hill overseeing the whole situation with a stifled laugh. The leader of this mission was already standing with his fists clasped tightly. His furious expression was quite a sight. Mark never thought that a dead person would still be capable of these expressions. However, what could they do if they could not see the enemy at all? Blindly charging forward would only cost them more casualties. None of Tan Stong's plans were usable at this point. Thus, he turned his eyes to the meat shields that seemed to be disregarded by the attacks. The humans they gathered cowered in fear as they lied down on the ground, shrinking themselves as much as possible. Since their guards were still around, these humans could neither run away nor hide. Rolling on the ground like a ball was the best that they could do and wish that none of the arrows and bullets shoot them. Thus, Tan Saitong decided to send these weaklings forward. He was about to issue the order. Then, one of his aides suddenly stepped in front of him. Splat! The head of the Jianshi exploded to pieces. Tan Saitong felt cold. That shot aimed at his head without a doubt. Fortunately, the Jiangshi's body was strengthened and was able to stop the bullet despite its head exploding. Losing the Jiangshi would be a big waste. Nevertheless, it was not as valuable as his life. This situation was the worst con of regaining consciousness after being a Jiangshi. Jiangshis relied on nothing but instinct to detect danger. For him, who was never a fighter in the first before he died and regained intelligence, he had to rely on his consciousness to do things. It also became his weakness as even weaker Jiangshis without consciousness would be able to detect that incoming attack. Tan Saitong immediately retreated to cover while the remaining Jiangshis protected him. His face was even more furious. Although the easiest way to end a battle was to slay the general, it was not in a way like this. Tan Saitong was a great warlord. He even managed to overwhelm military bases before just using an army he created. But now, the targets were not playing by the books. Not even in Tan Stong's most brilliant intelligence expected a scene like this to happen. More sniper bullets flew towards Tan Saitong. However, none of it hit him as the aides already got their weapons out to deflect the bullets. By this time, the army of Ouroboros already retreated into the woods, leaving the humans behind, cowering in fear. The arrows and bullets could still take out one or two, but the cover of trees and rocks greatly hindered the efficiency. Shing! Mark beheaded another member of Ouroboros that was behind the lines without making too loud sounds. While everyone went into hiding, it also made them even more vulnerable to sneak attacks. Thus, Mark threw Ignis forwards. The demon sword flew away to slay the enemies. Mark then took out the updated versions of his slicer and divider, the two sword whips he made before, and started the slaughter behind the lines. Like a shadow in the dark, Mark ran stealthily. The two whip-like swords in his hands danced around the trunks of the trees, shredding his enemies into pieces. On the other hand, Ignis was more swift. He flew around the trees, piercing through the bodies of the enemies before flying to the next target. No one realized yet. Even though the arrows and bullets were deadly, it was nothing but a diversion and crowd control. Although they could see the direction where the attacks were coming from, they could not rush forward as they could see nothing in front. The only thing they could do was to hide within the forest around the base, in which their ranks would break. The army of Ouroboros managed to hide from the front, but not from the back. Entering the forest not only broke their ranks but lessened the visibility around them considerably. This situation made it hard for them to notice that someone was hunting them from within their ranks. Unfortunately, this situation would not last long. Mark managed to slay about 50 enemies when two Jiangshis stepped forward to block his front. He could only shrug. It was not surprising considering that many of the members he killed were shadow people. There were those with ugly faces and green blood. Mark could keep the corpses as long as they fit his ring. However, the blood that splattered on the ground and the trees were hard to remove. As the smell of blood in the surroundings thickened, it was not easy to conceal what was happening here anymore. Still, Mark found it annoying that these Jiangshis could approach him without him noticing. They were corpses without consciousness, after all. They would not enter his emphatic detection. Unlike this one. Mark murmured with a smirk as he waved the slicer behind him, ignoring the two Jongas in front. A shadow dodged away forcefully. There, Chaya was present, trying to commit a sneak attack at Mark. It might have higher chances of working if it was the Jianshis who did that. Well, the enemies never knew that Mark could sense everything with consciousness and emotions in a large area around him. They never knew that sneak attacks like this would not work on him. Tisk! Chaya clicked her tongue as her attack failed miserably. She stood about 5 meters away from the enemy, staring warily with her black daggers on hand. "Who are you?" she asked as the enemy was wearing the same robe as their regular members, the plain gray-colored magical robe. Furthermore, like shadow people, his face was obscured by darkness. But when Chaya stared at the enemy's face longer, she noticed that his body was not like a shadow person, but there was just a dark haze blocking most of his face. Shing! Chaya suddenly spun her body and blocked an incoming attack from behind her. There, Ignis and the black dagger clashed, creating a loud metallic sound. After the attack was blocked, Ignis flew beside Mark, floating like an avatar behind him, peeking above his shoulder. Seeing the sword, Chaya frowned. There was no need to ask any more. This person wearing their magical robe was the same person Huo Long Yu encountered last night. Damn it, where's that crazy idiot when we need him? Chaya cursed. Huo Long Yu was the one that managed to witness how Mark fought. Thus, it would be easier to fight him if Chaya worked with Huo Long Yu. Unfortunately for her, Mark took out something. Are you looking for this? Mark smiled as he threw the thing towards Chaya. The item rolled on the ground, which immediately froze the Shadow Commander. It was Huo Long Yu's lifeless head. Chaya's actions did not falter that much, but her expression and emotion were very constrained. She never expected that, the contrary to what they thought, Huo Long Yu did not run off once again. He already died by the hands of the enemy in front of her without anyone noticing. Not minding Chaya and the two Jianshis encircling him and Ignis, Mark took out a glowing crystal. The glow of the photokinesis mental crystal was already very dim. Time's up, huh? He murmured as he tapped one of his rings. Then, he deactivated the crystal. Tan Saitong and the other members of Ouroboros became shocked. On the other hand, Chaya witnessed everything. The moment that the glow shrunk into the core of the crystal, the base appeared. As if a veil of light shattered around it. They thought that it vanished, but as they expected after the attacks commenced, it was still there. But still, what was with the current appearance of the base now? Before they activated the Fa copyright Fada, it was nowhere like this. Right now, even though the previous appearance of the base was still present, vines, leaves, bushes, and strange green trunk trees surrounded it. It was as if the immediate surroundings of the base became a strange forest. Day 126 to 1:40 p.m., Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Mark smiled, seeing the shock in the face of Chaya. After all, the current appearance of the base was one of his surprises. It was kind of disappointing that the photokinesis mental crystal could only support hiding the whole base for only around 10 minutes. Any more than that, and it would drain the crystal completely. He was also using it earlier to hide, which made the duration a bit shorter. Nevertheless, it was enough as the attacks coming from the base was barely working anymore. Ambush attacks were only viable for a short run. That was why most ambushes came about intending of utterly destroying the enemies in a short amount of time. However, they could not do that. Even though Mark took the initiative to make the ambush, they were still fighting a defensive battle here. Furthermore, being outnumbered would not do any help here. It was unfortunate that he had to evacuate the others, or else they would have more people to deal with the enemies. Despite Chaya's surprise towards the reappearing base, the two Jiangshis did not wait. Being corpses that did not have any intelligence, they were only moving on instincts left in their bodies and the orders they received from their owner. Thus, the two Jiangshis charged towards Mark without hesitation. Looking at it, Mark noticed that these two were different from the ones he fought last night. Those two fought using a sword and a chain. This time, he was facing ones that were using throwing daggers and a spear. One retreated while the other charged forwards. Taking out knives from inside the sleeves, the Jiangshi that fell back threw several knives, flying at a faster momentum as the one that charged forwards. On the other hand, the Jiangshi with the spear pointed his spear forward, making a swift charge at Mark. Seeing that the two Jianshis started, Chaya did not hesitate anymore and also moved. She ran a few steps forwards before vanishing into the shadows. Mark faced the two Zhongas and waved the slicer and divider differently. The first shot forwards while the other circled his body. Both moved like living things with minds of their own. Ting! 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 The knives arrived first at Mark, creating multiple metallic sounds as the divider deflected each of them. Pang! Another loud sound echoed as the tip of slicer collided with the tip of the spear. After deflecting the spear, the sword whip did not stop and swirled towards the Jiangshi holding it. Seeing the danger, the Jiangshi circled his spear, trying to tie the sword whip with its shaft. However, as he circled the spear, the incoming sword whip was the same. The Jiangshi was unable to do what it tried to and had no choice but to jump back and retreat. Using the momentum of that retreat, Mark then did what the Jiangshi wanted. He controlled the slicer and tied it on the spear. However, since the Jiangshi already jumped back, the spear was tugged away from his grasp instead. Behind Mark, Chaya appeared once more, attacking more aggressively than before. However, there was no way for her to get through with Ignis blocking the way firmly. Furthermore, every time that she wanted to skip into the shadow of Mark, the black flames of Ignis shot off, making her unable to. Then, as Chaya was fended off by Ignis, a spear flew towards her, which made her retreat immediately. Mark sighed. Sorry, I want to play more, but I can't. Mark said as he turned his gaze at Chaya. His eyes glowed bright red, which complemented his expression that cared for nothing. Gaha. Chaya fell on her knees. She held her head that felt like it was about to split. Seeing that, the two Jiangshis rushed over to protect her. Unfortunately for the two, they were on the other side of Mark. There was no way that he would let them do so. However, since these Jiangshis seemed to be precious, he would not try to kill them. The attention of the two Jiangshis was towards protecting their current commander. Using that as the opening, Mark vanished into a puff of smoke while scattering miasma at the same time. Feeling the danger that the miasma could bring to them, the two froze from going forwards. But then, from inside the miasma, a hand burst forth from the black wall and grabbed the talismans stuck on their faces consecutively. Unable to dodge the sudden attack that lacked killing intent or ill will, the two corpses fell like puppets with their strings cut. The miasma vanished, leaving only Mark and Ignis standing. Chaya already lost her consciousness and was sprawled on the ground, and the corpses were rendered immobile. Ignis flew into the sheath on his master's back. Mark did the same and sheathed the two sword whips. With a puff of black smoke that swirled around, Mark, Ignis, Chaya, and the two Jiangshis vanished. At the hill, Tan Saitong suddenly stood up. He lost connection to two of his Jongas once more. Being the master of these jumping corpses, although he could not communicate with them mentally, he could at least feel when the talisman on their forehead was working or not. Tan Stong's connection with the Jiangshis getting cut off was not new, since these jumping corpses were more adept in ancient martial arts than modern warfare. For the talismans to get destroyed because of bullets could happen. Nevertheless, it was very unusual to happen as the Jiangshis excelled in detecting danger. The last time that it happened was when they stirred some conflicts in Vietnam before but had a harder time than expected due to the Vietnamese terrain at that time. Now, however, this was the second time it happened in just one mission. Furthermore, it happened in pairs. The more Tan Saitong spent his time here, the more he found things inconceivable. Tan Saitong looked at the area where the connection cut off. A big explosion of miasma was present. That thing itself was already unbelievable. Why would miasma suddenly appear and disappear in this place for the second time? Did his Jiangshis got caught by the sudden surge of miasma? Tan Saitong already had to issue commands to deal with the reappearance of their target base. They could not just charge in blindly considering that the current appearance of the target was vastly different from the reports he received. His temper was getting riled up. Furthermore, Huo Long Yu was still missing. He also started to suspect the unexpected. Use berserk pills. Send in the humans. He ordered in a cold manner that chilled even the person he gave the order. The messenger immediately vanished to relay the orders to the squad handling the humans. Frowning deeply, Tan Saitong waited for the execution of his orders and the retrieval of the two Jiangshis if there was still any corpse left. But to add salt to his already riled-up temper, none of it happened. Tan Saitong was severely furious, yet, it made him realize something. The enemy was within their ranks. If this was the case, it might be possible that Huo Longyu did not run off again but was already dead. It should be the same for the messenger he sent, or else, why would the humans remain there not moving? Thus, he shouted from the top of the hill, "Release the soulless ones." With that command, the army composed of 500, level 3 mutated infected, charged forwards with their ferocious roars. It was already unnerving to see a horde of normal infected coming towards anyone's settlement, but to see 500,000 highly mutated infected, most people would have abandoned their bases and fled already. This horde was something that even the soldiers of settlements would struggle to fend off. Roars and growls echoed loudly as the mutated infected closed in towards the base. Some were fast, and some were slow. Nevertheless, that disarrangement showed which ones were attackers and which ones had a higher defense. But contrary to anyone would expect, the base continued to fire towards the hiding members of Ouroboros. They completely ignored the ferocious horde that was coming their way. And then, they saw a strange sight. The horde arrived at the strange forest that surrounded the base. Once the mutated infected entered, however, the infected started running off in every direction. They did run off in every direction except the direction of the base they should attack. Some would run off along the strange forest, while others would end up running out towards the direction where they entered. Those infected that got out of the forest would re-enter, following the orders given to them, but would end up doing the same, repeating the process. This strange sight staggered everyone's thinking process. As for Tan Saitong, he stared widely at the comical act before him. None of his plans here was working. This situation was unacceptable to his ego and reputation. Something was missing in his calculations. It was the owner of the spirit tree that never appeared at all. Their only clue was the report given by Huo Longyu, but that was never concrete. Tan Saitong hated one word the most. Nevertheless, it seemed that he had no choice but to use it twice in this mission. "Retreat!" He shouted as loud as he could, delivering his order. It was a different command if Tan Saitong shouted that word along with other orders. Shouting that word alone, however, meant that they were canceling the mission and needed to evacuate the area. None of the members of Ouroboros hear though that they would hear that from their leader. Nevertheless, they understood why. All that happened here was inconceivable to the degree of fantasy. It was even though the existence of the members of Ouroboros should include themselves in that genre in the first place. Abandoning their posts because of the order, they followed the escape plan drafted in case that something happened. Tan Saitong might hate that word and act. Nevertheless, he was careful enough to make several plans of retreat for situations like this. The question, however, lay in the enemy whether they would let them retreat or not. It was not new for the winning side to pursue the enemies and slaughter the losing side. And that was not wrong. As they deformed their retreat, the enemy within their ranks finally revealed himself. With two swords moving like whips on his both hands and a flying black flamberge beside him, he started to kill without mercy. With his glowing red eyes, everyone around him froze, and the blades of his swords danced. No one was able to resist as they could not move a finger. Seeing that, Tan Saitong immediately sent his remaining aides to assist his people. Tan Saitong knew about this from Huo Longyu. The mental attack that the crazy dragon experienced the night before. Nevertheless, who would have known that this mental attack was something of an area effect instead of a targeted one? Huo Longyu lacked that information as he was alone with two mindless corpses when he received the attack. The four remaining aides tried to hold back the enemy. In terms of close-quarters combat, these corpses fighting together was equal to the fighting strength a medium-sized squad had. But then, another burst of miasma exploded, covering the four Jiangshis. Tan Saitong stared wide-eyed as his connection to the four was lost instantly. And now, he finally determined that the sudden appearance of miasma in this place was not a coincidence. It was the enemy all this time. And without a doubt, the owner of the spirit tree they were trying to acquire. An unknown and unexpected existence. a being capable of wielding miasma despite having immortal flesh. While in that predicament, however, the skies suddenly turned dark. The black, heavy clouds violently swirled as if it was already the end of the world. For the first time since the Qing dynasty, the time of his execution, Tan Saitong felt fear. He thought that the sky darkening was also a move of his unpredictable enemy. Then, a ridiculing voice echoed from the sky, scurrying like rats. Is this the most that the China branch can do? Everyone looked up. No one was an exception. From the circle of the vortex of clouds, a silhouette of a figure emerged. It was high, but not high enough that everyone here that was beyond human could not see. Nevertheless, all they could see was a robed silhouette covered in a black haze. Day 126 to 1:51 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. The clear skies turned dark as if there was an incoming storm. Thick black clouds covered the blue sky, swirling violently. It signaled the arrival of a unique being that should not appear in front of anyone that easily. When he appeared, it was kind of unexpected that the first words he let out were to ridicule Tan Saitong and his soldiers. Despite being far away, his voice reverberated in their ears. Nevertheless, despite that ridicule, it meant another thing. The individual that came was also one of them. But then, when Tan Saitong and Mark saw the person, the former was shocked while the latter had a fierce glare on his eyes. Nevertheless, no matter what reaction, the arrival of this individual could mean the safe retreat of Tan Stong's people. The Great One. Tan Saitong immediately prostrated. Not everyone in Ouroboros had the honor of being able to see any of the founders of the organization. The lucky ones were those that were directly following their orders and the higher members of the branches. Thus, most of the members here only heard about one of the founders of their organization. Even though the Great One was not in charge of the Chinese branch among the founders, it was unlikely for them to watch their members get slaughtered before them. Unfortunately for them, the Great One did not care for them in the slightest. Shhhhomm. The black clouds covering the sky started to make smaller vortices which surged towards the ground like thin tornadoes. At a fast speed not any less than a bullet, these tornadoes, each having a diameter of 2 meters, rushed to the ground. The wind picked up around each tornado. It was too strong that the trees near it got uprooted immediately the moment it touched the ground. And despite coming from different directions, all of the tornadoes converged towards one impact point. All of it was aiming towards Mark. He, who was still killing the members of Ouroboros, despite the appearance of the Great One above. The dark raging clouds surged without mercy, even though some of the members of Ouroboros were still around him. The wind was strong, and it sucked away everything. Nevertheless, there was nothing inside the tornadoes despite everything it sucked into its bodies. Instead, thick clouds of dust flew round like a sandstorm. It was dust with a black hue that smelled like a mix of ground flesh, trees, leaves, and dirt. This dust was nothing else but everything that touched the tornadoes. Into unrecognizable pieces of dust, that was what everything that entered the tornadoes ended up. This scene threw everyone, whether it was the humans or not, into a state of panic. The humans brought in by Ouroboros did not care whether they died trying to flee. This place was not meant for humans to linger around. Either they die escaping or die staying around. They chose to do the former as it had more chances of surviving. Who knows who gave the signal? They all scrambled around scurrying away in groups. Fortunately, none of the members of Ouroboros bothered about them anymore. They were also busy trying to survive as many of them were closer to the black tornadoes. Many of them got dragged away with their futile resistance. The black tornadoes ravaged the forest. It was trying to pursue its enemy. In every direction it touched, only the darkened ground filled with dust remained. Trees, plants, humans, infected, and even the surface of the ground turned to a layer of dust that could be easily blown by the wind. Nevertheless, the actual target was never there in the first place. "I should be doing the welcome, not you," Mark said as his figure blurred not far behind the Great One. This time, he was not holding back anything. he had already transformed into his blood demon form. The Great One calmly turned around, hovering midair, uncaring that Mark was unscathed. "You don't have to be humble. I am not invited by anyone, after all," he replied with a calm voice. Mark stared at the enemy. He felt a bit glad, and sure enough, he avoided the situation that the elder warned him. Following the previous plan, he would be staying at the base, while watching his people fight and use the enemies to train under his surveillance. Now, however, he chose to be the only force attacking the enemies from outside the base. There was where the future changed. Following the actions that this high and mighty being in front of him, it was very likely that he used the same attack in the original timeline. If that was the case, that force was enough to pulverize his base and kill everyone in it. With how fast the black tornadoes traveled from the sky to the ground, there was barely any time for him to dodge. He might be able to save Mei and his family, who should be watching around him, but not the others. This time, however, since he was alone on the battlefield, away from the base, the worst-case scenario was averted. And instead, the ones dragged by the disaster were the other members of Ouroboros. "Deity, why would attack us?" Tan Saitong shouted from the ground. He was furious, but he still needed to ask as humble as possible. The Great One was not someone he should question in the first place. However, this not only impacted his forces but the China branch as a whole. What he did, however, asking and shouting the being that he knew that he should not question, was the biggest mistake. The Great One turned his head towards Tan Saitong. His face and expression were not visible. Mark, however, could tell that the Great One was annoyed. And to any annoyance that disturbed his business, the only way out was death. To Tan Stong's horror, another tornado shot from the sky to where he stood. He managed to dodge it, and by his movements, he was fiercer than the Jianshis that served as his aides. Nevertheless, even though he could dodge one, he would not be able to avoid more. The Great One was annoyed further as Tan Saitong avoided the first strike. Thus, he sent 4 at the same time, surrounding the vice leader of China branch on the ground. This time, however, the 4 were larger but weaker despite having the same speed as the previous ones. With 4 tornadoes surrounding him, Tan Saitong was unable to escape anymore. He was trapped in the middle as the weaker tornadoes slowly ground his body to dust while he screamed in horror. It took about a whole minute before Tan Stong's body turned into dust. Since he was not a real living being, to begin with, he did not die totally until his head was also consumed by the black tornadoes. That was painful suffering, more painful when he was executed back in his previous life. Tan Stong's last painful screams echoed across the mountains even after his body was gone. "Quite heartless, aren't you?" Mark smirked, suiting his current devilish appearance. It was not like he hated what the Great One did. "There are no annoying pests anymore." The Great One turned to Mark. It was impossible to see his current expression because of the haze covering his body. "Actually, there is. Ants. Below." Mark pointed at the remaining members of Ouroboros, trying their best to escape. "Do you think that I will erase them all for you?" The Great One said with a deep, furious voice. "Yeah?" Mark said, almost laughing. He even tilted his head to provide more insult. His red glowing eyes continued to stare at the enemy filled with ridicule. Of course, the high and mighty ego of the Great One slowly filled up with rage. The Great One made an unseeable glare at Mark as the clouds once more swirled with vertices everywhere. Like missiles, multitudes of black tornadoes surged towards Mark. Mark flapped his wings fast. He flew away with all the tornadoes following him. His eyes landed on the fleeing members of Ouroboros once more with a witty expression. Without hesitation, he flew down to the horror of everyone on the ground. He flew just several inches above the ground, maneuvering his way as fast as he could. Mark flew around a large tree, behind one member who was running away, turned into mist and swerved under the feet of another, and then through a large group of shadow people. Everything he flew by turned to dust without exception. Suddenly, the tornadoes chasing dissipated. Mark could not help but look at the Great One that was getting increasingly furious at every second that passed. Mark actually had the gall to use his attack to clear the remaining members of the China branch. Those that managed to survive Mark's flight scurried away faster than before. Their only wish right now was to get away from this place. I just want to test my new body and settle my business with you for damaging my spirit core last time. But it seems like you were wasting my patience. The Great One's voice echoed in everyone's ears. It felt like their heads were ringing badly. Without warning, the Great One waved his hand towards the base. With that motion, a wide black tornado surged towards it. Spera. Mark called out in his mind, using Jay's telepathy, was very useful at these times. In front of the surging black clouds, an even bigger portal opened. Even the Great One was shocked at the appearance of the portal. The portal that only Spera knew where it led to swallowed the whole tornado and continued to transport the continuous surge of swirling clouds. He might be surprised, but he did not falter. The Great One waved his hand once more, trying to send another one towards the base. Nevertheless, he was not able to and had to move away and evade. A surge of miasma passed by his previous position. And then, Mark appeared behind him, waving Ignis to cut his head. Black clouds covered the Great One's body, letting Ignis pass through without resistance. The black clouds moved away fast before forming back into the Great One's body. Mark flapped his wings with its red glowing veins. He immediately appeared behind the Great One, slashing 3 swords at the same time. Holding Ignis with his 2 hands together with the slicer and divider that was controlled by his blood whips, attacked the enemy. Each blade was coated with black smoke, trying to disable and weaken the Great One. With swift movements, the Great One maneuvered against Mark's fast attacks. Despite the fast movements that could not be seen by the naked eye anymore, Mark did not hit anything. The Great One was able to cope with his swift attacks. Mark sliced 3 swords multiple times as if simulating a battle from the anime with 7-starred balls. The Great One evaded every slash like a walk at the park. Although he could deflect the swords, he was still wary about the miasma that coated the blades. But then, Mark's red eyes glowed brighter. The Great One suddenly felt sluggish. Nevertheless, the Great One was able to recover swiftly. Still, Mark managed to get a hit if it was considered as one. As the Great One paused for a millisecond, the slicer managed to snag the haze that covered the face of the enemy. When that happened, the Great One suddenly exploded a thick gust of clouds around him, making Mark shield himself with miasma and retreat. Nevertheless, Mark already saw the face behind that black haze. He could not help but stare with a frown. The face that was hardly a face at all. The Great One had a mouth and 2 holes for a nose. As for the rest of the Great One's face, it was occupied by a widely opened vertically eye. Day 126 to 2:01 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. The Great One immediately covered his face with a haze once more, strange enough, in quite a panicked way. Even though Mark only saw a short glimpse of that face, it already made him frown deeply. Another thing was the reaction he felt after using his emotion induction towards the Great One to freeze him. There was something odd that was going on. That is not your real body. Why do you have a body of an eye? Mark voiced out as he paused his attacks. That was what he felt. When he used his emotion induction, there was very little response. There was no resistance, yet there was almost no effect. It was like the body was here, but the mind was far away. The only thing that was affected was the connection between the body and the consciousness that was controlling it. Furthermore, there was that vertical eye. There was a lot of creatures in mythology with a single eye and even had various shapes and appearance. It was the same for those with multiple to hundreds or thousands of eyes. But with Mark's experience combined with the memories of Freed, there was something unique about the eyes sent by an observer. No matter what shape they had, how many eyes they had, whether those had tentacles or not, even if they had the intelligence or not, there was one thing that never changed. Their eyes gave a pressure of dominance to those that stare at it. That pressure that could make everyone with a weak mind give in just by staring at it. That was one reason that even though they suspected it a bit, they never persecuted Amy, who had a resemblance to that monster from Freed's world. Instead of dominance, Amy was more like an animal who lost her home. On the other hand, that same sliver and pressure of dominance were present on that single eye on the Great One's face. The Great One also paused after hearing that question. I never thought that you already reached the point of learning about the observers. There was no pretense in that. Even in the Ouroboros, only the founders and a few highest-ranking members knew of this truth about the world. Ho! The Great One came to a sudden thought. Someone had been in contact with a reclusive god, I see. Because of the haze covering his face, no one could tell his expression. Nevertheless, it was no doubt that the Great One was amused. Interesting. At first, I'm just trying out this body I newly acquired, but things are getting interesting. You call that puppet a body of yours? Mark asked. Why not? Thanks to you, my spirit is damaged. It will be hard to form a real body anytime soon. If you can kill this one, then you deserve to live until we can meet face to face. If not, then this the farthest you can go. It will be an honor to die in the hands of this deity. The Great One replied in an attitude that did not care for anything. Mark even heard information that should be crucial. A damaged spirit body was not something that could heal that fast. Even gods had to struggle once their spirit was damaged, not to mention a lower deity like the Great One. The gods of creation were not an exemption to that either. They could create unique and spectacular things, but not mend their damaged spirits. To humans, having a damaged spirit was no different to getting into a comatose state with barely any chance of recovering. The only ones capable of healing someone's spirit was the gods that reign over spirits and souls. In the current time, however, where would they find one? That was some good news for Mark, but came with a piece of bad news as a pair. The Great One already had found his base and was capable of sending his avatars to harass him. No, from what the Great One said, they could meet face to face after he recreated his body. It could mean that he had no intention of sending more puppets. Was he testing Mark? No, there was no reason to. But then, the realization came. The Great One did not answer one of his questions. That was why he had a body of an eye as a puppet. He did that on purpose to hide his true intentions. Mark could tell without a doubt. With a murderous glint in his eyes, Mark spoke in his mind. Jaya, tell Spera to open a portal at my signal. There was a cold tone in the message he sent, which made Jaya, who was inside the base, to falter a bit. Where? Spera asked. The destination. Anywhere far from here. If possible, on the opposite side of Earth. Anywhere? Jaya tried to confirm. I'll repeat, anywhere far from here. Oh, okay. We got it. We'll wait for your signal. Mark closed his eyes and took a deep breath. You don't only have someone with the body of void, but also someone with portals. Now, someone with telepathy. Your place sure is a den of talents. What are you telling them to do? Sure enough, the Great One could tell that Mark was communicating with someone from the base. Fortunately, it seemed that he was not able to tap into it. I want to ask one last thing. Mark opened his eyes with a serene expression. What kind of deity are you? That was one thing that interested Mark. There were deities of elements, of wisdom, and there were also others with minor designations. Yet, he could not tell what the Great One was. Me? I'm a deity of nothingness. Everything that I lay my hands on will become nothing but dust. From dust where everything started, and to dust will everything end. Hearing those words, no wonder why everything hit from the Great One's attacks disintegrated into dust. Did that answer satisfy you? The Great One asked as he waved both his hands. Black clouds came swirling out of his robe, covering a large area. On the other hand, Mark sheathed the slicer and divider. Ignis, return to the base. Help protect it. Ignis shivered in frustration. Nevertheless, it followed the order and flew around the cover of clouds back to the base. Crimson. Mark said as a cloud of miasma materialized around him. The miasma surged around his body, forming a sinister-looking armor. 8 whips made of blood burst out from his back, forming into black metallic segmented limb-like spears. Together with his 2 pairs of bat wings, the spears looked sinister. Still, Mark felt that it was not enough. Even though the body in front of him was nothing but a puppet, its strength was the real deal. Mark was powerful, but he was still nowhere near a deity just by his strength alone. Release. Mark murmured as the black markings on his neck and wrists started to spread all over his body once more. The scleras of his eyes turned black, which emphasized his eyes that were glowing with different colors. His right eye shined bright red while his left eye glowed violet. As the black markings spread, his body became coated with a thin film of miasma protecting his body. Suddenly, Mark moved his head to the side. A string of black clouds passed by at the speed of an anti-materiel bullet. At that dodge, the voice of the Great One echoed from the clouds once more. Different abilities from different beings inside one body. An existence like you definitely should not exist. As that was said, smaller and even needle-sized vortices appeared from the cluster of black clouds. There were also tornadoes with the same size as the previous ones forming above. The smaller the attack, the faster it moved. That was why Spera had the time to react to that large-scale attack that the Great One. Nevertheless, these smaller ones could only work for shorter distances before dissipating. That was how Mark observed it, as the one he dodged just now dissipated before reaching the ground. Still, with this many attacks forming at the same time, even though the Great One called this a test, he was keen on killing Mark. And even if he was not able to, there would be someone else to deal with the aftermath. What a sinister plan. Telling Mark that they could meet in the future was nothing but a lie to hide the Great One's true intentions. BOOHHHHHOMMMMM. Like missiles from an armada of spaceships, multitudes of swirling clouds flew towards Mark. How many were there? Hundreds? Thousands? Only the Great One could tell. And all those attacks that could disintegrate matter to dust were all aimed at Mark. Alone, he was facing an attack that could destroy a whole city in an instant. Mark's figure blurred, leaving the afterimage of his glowing eyes. He moved his body around the air, evading each of the attacks that came across his body. Some faster attacks seemed to hit his body. The moment the attack hit, all was left was an afterimage, and Mark had already appeared at another place. There were some of the smallest and fastest attacks that grazed Mark's body, but the armor and the film of miasma protected him. As Mark avoided the massive attacks, however, the swirling clouds bent behind him and returned. At the same time, the other attacks coming from different directions curved towards him. From above, behind, right, left, front, and below. Mark was trapped at the center with all the attacks coming towards him. Then, everything picked up speed, trying to give him the finishing blow. Both Mark's eyes glowed brightly in violet color. His body blurred as the subspace created by him, shadow mist movement, expanded. Adrenaline enhanced his focus. The veins around his eyes glowed red brightly. A burst of red glow covered his body as his blood burned fiercely. Everything slowed down. In a blink of an eye, Mark left a trail of bright red light as his body moved. His body was nothing but a red blur as he flew around and in between the swirling clouds. He charged towards the black clouds covering the puppet of the Great One. The swirling clouds that missed their target hit each other. The difference in speed, the direction of rotation, and the trajectory caused the clouds to explode and scatter. Those attacks that managed to remain formed continued flying on their trajectory. Some continued flying towards the sky before dissipating. The majority scattered across the ground, turning everything that was hit to dust. Some end up flying towards the base. Fortunately, the portal that Spera opened earlier was still there, swallowing most of the stray swirling clouds. As for those remaining, Ignis clad in black flames flew to block while the smaller ones were shot by May. The bullets turned to dust, but it destroyed the swirling clouds that already lost their momentum. Charging forward, Mark scattered a surge of miasma to intercept many of the swirling clouds coming towards him. The clouds were made with energy, but it was too destructive to be swallowed whole. Both the swirling clouds and the surge of miasma that clashed dissipated into nothing. Finally, Mark managed to close into the scattered black clouds around the puppet of the Great One. With his arms stretched out and both hands wide open, a thick burst of miasma scattered around, enclosing the cloud that the Great One created. The already darkened sky became even darker. Now, behind this guy, in the direction that I'm flying to. Mark shouted in his mind. A portal opened behind the thick black cloud as Mark charged into it. There was a bit of struggle inside the dark cloud, but as Mark enclosed it with miasma, there was nowhere to run to. Soon, two figures burst out of the thick clouds. It was Mark who was pushing the puppet of the Great One onto the portal. Mark was injured. Some areas of his arms, legs, and face already disintegrated into dust. One of his wings was missing, and some parts of his armor were broken. Nevertheless, he used the metal limbs on his back to pierce the body of the puppet tightly. As fast as he could, Mark flew with the puppet into the portal that only Spera knew where it would lead to. Close it. Don't open one after another day. That was the last thing they heard from Mark before he entered the portal with the enemy. As the portal closed, the thick black clouds in the sky dissipated. With the light of the sun returning, everyone could clearly see the destruction left behind by that battle. There was almost nothing left in the flatlands around the base anymore, only a few trees that managed to luckily survive. Even the crops and fields that they painstakingly made had already turned to dust. Seeing this scene made them feel alive. It was good that everyone managed to prepare to protect the base. Now, they only needed to wait and pray that Mark would be all right. Day 126 to 2:10 p.m., Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Atop the mountain, Yukine and Kuki safely watched the spectacle. The shocking scene they had watched was enough to make the hair on the back of their necks stand up in fear. What they saw was not like things they encountered before. Furthermore, she had just conversed with Mark the previous night, where they mentioned the name of the Great One. And yet, the next day, he came to crash the party. No wonder the oracle said that it is a calamity. Kuki, the Tengu, murmured beside Yukine. The Great One, the eighth founder of Ouroboros, the deity of nothingness, those three were among the four titles that he had. As for the fourth one, from the people of his time, the Great One was called the Black Storm. There was not much known about the deity that gave himself the arrogant title of the Great One, and even his origins were obscured. However, there was one thing that Yukine heard from her mother, the Empress. It might just be some hoax or rumor, but it might have some truth in it. The Great One was neither a creature or a human. Even so, considering him as a human might not be wrong at all. He was not born as a creature of nature, after all. Instead, he was born as a non-existent twin of a human child. He was not invisible like anyone would imagine. The Great One was born without a solid body, very similar to formless demons. That was why even his mother never knew of his existence at all. When he was born, however, the calamity struck. The whole village turned to dust. He was a child, bearing the curse planted unto his mother. It was his destiny to destroy since he was born. No one knew what happened to him after that. The next time he appeared was a decade later as he destroyed the place where the curse came. At that time, he finally gained a body of his own with painstaking effort. And that was when the people noticed him as a calamity called the Black Storm. Unfortunately, the gods at that time would not let a creature like him grow. They chased him down, gaining his ire. That ire forced the creature that had no mortal body, to begin with, to grow more powerful. The Great One, unlike other beings of Earth, was born a deity. The curse he carried was that strong to give birth to a catastrophic deity. Those gods managed to kill the physical body he created, but never managed to kill his spirit. Thus, like what they did to others, they sealed the catastrophe away. But before the Ouroboros formed, the first founder reached out and released the imprisoned disaster. And now that humans started to go extinct, it seemed he decided to start playing. He might be thousands of years old already, but it still felt like he was a child who found a new toy and was trying to show it off. Yukine murmured as she remembered the attitude that he showed to Mark. Mark was quite desperate to fight and protect his base, but to the Great One, it was nothing but a game. The fight here is over and the devastation left by the Great One was quite massive. If the people living in that base were regular people, this was enough to make them struggle. The crops they planted and soon would be harvesting were all turned to empty fields filled with nothing but blackened dust. The forest that served as secondary protection of the base from the eyes of many was already gone. The nearest edge was several dozens of meters away. Luckily, the spring that was the source of water of the base was inside. If not, who knows if the water got contaminated. It was also questionable if the soil basked in this black dust was still arable. The lingering stench of danger should be enough to make the edible animals stay away. And the magical energy left by the battle might attract infected from who knows where. After this catastrophe, the base was in for a worse time. Nevertheless, even though the battle here already finished, it was still ongoing on the other side. Day 126 to 3:10 a.m. North Atlantic Ocean. The dark before dawn sky obscured the dark clouds that appeared once more. They flew above the Atlantic Ocean, a place where nothing and no one would be dragged into this battle unknowingly. It was a good choice of place by Spera, but knows how she had been here in the middle of this ocean before. Mark stared at the enemy in front of him as the injuries he acquired started to recover. On the other side, the Great One watched Mark heal as if it was something amusing. "I seemed you noticed," the Great One said as he looked around. Nevertheless, there was just amusement in his voice and did not care much whether he was found out or not. "As if I will try to destroy that body near my base." Mark replied with a glare. It was kind of unusual that the Great One kept on obscuring the sky and the face of that body even though there was no need to do so. And thinking about that matter, it became more and more suspicious. That was when Mark realized. The Great One was trying to drag his place into the wrath of the observer. Everyone who knew called them observers, but it did not mean that they were able to see everything, especially those detached from the world fate, the ones with the potential to become gods. Gods had to hide because their godly auras were easily detectable, but those below them, it was not easy even for the observers to locate them immediately. They were only observers and not the god that created the world. That was where the eyes came in. The stronger ones tend to attack, but how were they observers able to locate those to be attacked in the first place? That should be where the scouts that served as the sight of the observer came in. Those that were hard to be seen and detected. Something shaped more like humans. One of those was the body that the Great One was currently using. Even though he had gained control over it, the sight that it could give to the observer must still be there. Once the Great One removed the black clouds or that haze on its face, even his would be seen by the observer. And if Mark destroyed it near his base, it was very likely that while the connection would be severed, the location of its death would become revealed to the owner. None of those should happen. Mark might be able to obscure himself from that sight because of his miasma and severed fate, but his base would become exposed to who knows what amount of danger. Flapping his 3 remaining wings and the last one that was still healing, Mark released a huge amount of miasma into the surroundings, trying to overcome even the clouds in the sky. Of course, the Great One did not just watch. Using the black clouds he was releasing, he scattered his own. 2 waves of black forces collided, each trying their strongest to win against each other. But to Mark's dismay, it was a tie. His miasma could not push forwards anymore than what he was able to. Mark's miasma and the Great One's destructive clouds were equal at most. The former could not eat the latter could not fully destroy the former. It was a stalemate. Well, if Mark continued this way. Finally, Mark's missing wing finished regenerating. He flew at fast speeds once more. On the other hand, the Great One just hovered in place, but his attacks were fiercer than before. But then, Mark took something out that he had never used in an actual battle before. "An eye for an eye," they said. Mark murmured. A crystal hovered in front of him as he flew. And then, Sham mm. A blinding beam of light that obscured the night sky shot off. Even the Great One did not expect it. The beam of light came faster than he could see. Before he could even react, the body he was currently using disintegrated to nothing. Nevertheless, the presence of the Great One did not vanish. "You really have a lot of interesting things, don't you?" The Great One's voice echoed in Mark's ears. Nevertheless, there was no indication of where it was coming from. "We will play again in the future. Don't disappoint me. If you don't entertain me like this next time, let's see what reaction your face that lacked expressions will show me as I take that woman as my bride. Ha 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 ha." With that evil laugh, the voice of the Great One vanished. Mark looked at the crystal on his hand, only one use and it was already dim. The power was not something to joke at, but the expenditure was also huge. He did not know how long this would charge up as he only used a little of it before for preparation, but it took 2 days for a small laser pistol-sized beam to recharge. But it was worth it. For now, he managed to avert the danger from his base. With the disappearance of the Great One, the clouds that covered the sky started to dissipate. Seeing that, Mark also fled as fast as he could. Who knows what would happen here now that the body of the eye died? However, Mark did not know where he was right now. The only thing he could do was fly away in a random direction as long as he could get away from this place. Half an hour later, Mark's premonition came true. 15 figures appeared at the place where the battle took place. All of them had unique features. Most of them were capable of flight while some were swimming underwater. The only similar features on their bodies, however, there were eyes at places that eyes should not be located. Each of them was at the level of a deity in strength, probably even stronger than the Great One. If Mark saw this, he would be sure that even the observer was taking advantage of the outbreak to clean up things he wanted to clean. It was understandable considering that an organization of non-human creatures surfaced after the outbreak. The figures scoured the area for anything for who knows long. They were patient just to get any clue of what had happened here. They took a whole day searching without any complaint. Unfortunately, they found nothing but a sliver of residual energy left by the battle. Anger was clear on their faces. One of them just had gone missing and suddenly perished. It was a disgrace to them even though the one that died was the weakest among them. Without any lead as to what happened, they left and went back to their own duties. It was to search for clues as to where the reclusive gods were hiding. While all of that was happening, Mark reached a place he had never been to before. After the battle, he flew randomly in the west direction, avoiding any suspicious presence. In fact, he detected one that was flying towards the direction where he came from after 15 minutes. He did not dare confront the being, however. The guy was emitting a pressure not far from Bathala. Using the last sliver of the photokinesis mental crystal, he made himself invisible as he flew just a few inches above the ocean waters. After another 20 minutes of flying stealthily, he saw a patch of land on the horizon. And there, he arrived, at Atlantic City, New Jersey. Day 126 to 3:42 a.m. Atlantic City, New Jersey, United States of America. Atlantic City. It was a city established at the Atlantic coast of New Jersey during the 1800s as a health resort. It then became known as a resort city with casinos, wide beaches, many other features aimed for relaxation and entertainment. Now, however, the city's bright lights were already gone, and it was nothing but a dead silhouette of a city filled with tall buildings from afar. After a tiring flight, Mark landed atop a high-rise building by the coast. He breathed deeply. It was very tiring trying to flee in that situation that you know when something that you could not handle might appear. Mark walked towards the edge of the building, sitting down as he looked around the area. There were other places he could land when he was flying away. From the north, there seemed to be some suburban city. It was the same in the south. However, both areas were not that suitable for hiding. If one was fleeing from something, it was a better choice to find where there were more places to hide. It was not like something was chasing him, but it was never a bad thing to be careful. After all, who knows? He liked to hide his trump cards and use them at crucial times. The others could be the same. Furthermore, who knew what else the enemies were capable of, considering nothing much was known about them. As Mark looked around, the city was dead quiet, but it did not mean that no activities were happening. In the first place, Mark did not know where in the world he was right now. The only thing he could think of was somewhere in America because of what he told Spera before opening the portal. He also flew across an ocean towards the west. The outlook of the city also resembled the North American casino cities. Even the reason why he landed on this specific building was that it stood out quite a bit. This orange-colored, large building with a tall tower seemed to be a multi-purpose tourist site. Now that he got a closer look at it, even the building connected to several casinos around it. To the north, there was another casino hotel that was violet-colored. It was more conspicuous, but Mark avoided that one. It was because one of the activities in the area was there. Why was Mark aiming for buildings that stood out? Of course, it was because the more conspicuous the hiding place was, the more likely that who or what could be chasing would think less of it. Well, it would not work all the time, but there was still the chance that it would. Mark sat at the edge of the building but away from anywhere that anyone could see him easily. He was waiting if there was something to happen and was getting ready for another action if needed. While he did so, Mark was observing that violet-colored casino hotel. It was quite surprising to find survivors in a place like this. If one to look below the streets, where was quite an amount of infected. It was something to expect in cities that invested more in tourism. The outbreak suddenly came, and the tourists that flocked in these areas during the holidays turned into infected. To say, as a fan of the zombie genre, Mark missed seeing a scene like this. After all, they had been spending their time at the base surrounded by greeneries. A zombie apocalyptic city scenery was more pleasing to Mark's eyes if not for the danger. Looking back at that building, Mark could see how these people managed to survive. The lower roof of the casino used to be part of rooftop restaurants and a big swimming pool. Since that was the case, they were able to use the rooftop that already had enough facilities to shelter people. With that as the main camp, they were able to cross a large area using the junctions that connected the buildings. Mark closed his eyes, enveloping the whole casino he was looking at with his emphatic detection. He detected something unexpected. It might be a coincidence, but who knew? There was an inheritor among the survivors in that casino hotel. Mark could not tell which ability the person inherited. Nevertheless, it was definitely something worthy of checking. Of course, he had no reason to meet or show himself to the person. As long as he passed Freed's criterion, there was no need for any interaction. And to say, if he was to evaluate the current state of his survivor camp, it was rather neutral. Their emotional states were not happy but not that disturbed either. They seemed to be content just by surviving. Nevertheless, there seemed to be some problems. That was what Mark thought as the mutators were together emitting some uneasiness in their conversation. Mark waited in his position for another hour. Fortunately, nothing seemed to be tailing him. It would be a bad thing if there were in any case. Nevertheless, he did not dare go home immediately. Someone might call him being too careful, but it was better than botching things up. In any case, he already told Spera to open the portal back after a day. Thus, he could stay here and go home later. While patting the dust off from his pants, Mark stood up. The sky already had a glimpse of dawn as he was on the eastern coast. The breeze was cold, but a bit salty. It was something that one could expect when near the ocean. Still, Mark had quite a jet lag. It was already past lunchtime when the battle started, and yet, here he was now. On the morning of the same day again. The feeling was quite odd. Mark looked at one of the rings on his fingers. He started sending magical energy at it without trying to activate it. This ring was one of the pair of rings May received from Bathala. The rings that would allow the wearers to teleport to each other. During the preparation, Mark and May already tested it. There seemed to be no repercussion to using it. However, the rings could only be used with a day interval after the last one. It was something like a cooldown as the rings replenish the energy used on their own. Mark tried replenishing it with his own energy or the crystals. Unfortunately, That was not applicable. He could use it now, and return. Still, he would use this in times of emergency instead. A day might not be too long, but seconds of danger could already cause a catastrophe. Nevertheless, Mark and May found another use for these rings. When one ring was activating, the wearer of the other pair would feel a slight vibration to indicate the arrival of the other. However, this vibration would trigger while the ring was preparing the energy being used for transfer and could be cancelled before activation. That, however, led to something like a communication device between Mark and May. Using the vibrations with Morse code, they could send messages when they were far from each other. And right now, he was sending a message to May that was on the other side of the globe. ******** Day 126 to 3:16 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon. Past an hour after Mark dragged the Great One through the portal that Spera opened, those that were left at the base were worried. They did not dare call the others out yet, and they were still waiting for any danger that could appear. While they did that, they started eliminating the scattered infected outside the base. Without anyone controlling the infected started to go rampant and even tried to attack the base. Fortunately, the base was made to defend against the infected. There were some infected that were troublesome to deal with, but all still fell. Finally, after waiting for a while, May's ring let out a weak vibration. Translating the code was quite hard, but May had no qualms learning it. She was still slow, though. It was not too hard to learn, but it was not something that could be memorized perfectly in a few days. "Sis, how is he?" Jaya asked May, who was still receiving Mark's message. "Gurgur Wan." May smiled. He said not to worry about him. It seems like he's in New Jersey right now. He's still looking for any directory or address around. New Jersey. Spera really sent him that far, Jaya said as she looked at Spera, who was currently sleeping. She's spent, though. Spera was the MVP when it came to protecting the base this time. In return, however, she immediately fell asleep after the battle. From what they could see, Spera spent her magical energy to the last drop. She might have gotten stronger because of Mark. Still, opening a large portal and another that connected to the opposite side of the world would leave her incapacitated afterward. Not to mention the effort she exerted in order to maintain the large portal from crumbling, her mental stress would surely be heavier than anyone here. Well, the danger this time had already passed. The next thing they should focus on was to recover. The surroundings of the base were devastated, after all. The old couple will be sad after seeing that, Jaya said with a shrug while looking at the already non-existent crop fields. By the way, won't Big Brother return? Not yet. He's being careful not to drag anything unnecessary back here. Also, the rings are for an emergency, May said with a smile as she looked at the ring on her ring finger. Let's just wait until Spera recover. ******** Day 126 to 3:42 a.m. Bally's, Atlantic City, New Jersey, United States of America. Inside the office of the casino, the mutators gathered as they discussed their worries. These mutators led this group of survivors holed at the rooftop of Bally's casino. Ever since the start of the outbreak, all of them had been here. No one tried to leave, or rather, no one could leave even if they wanted to. They were trapped in this casino. It was because Atlantic City was one of the worst ground zeros in the state. The chances that an accident where two passenger airplanes would collide in the air was too small. And yet, it happened above this city before the outbreak started. Many people witnessed it when two airplanes suddenly stalled and lost control, deviating from their paths and colliding with each other. That large display of fireworks brought hell to the city as mutated infected rained from above. Many died from the fall, but most of them managed to live with just broken body parts. Unlike how the outbreak started at one area in other ground zeros, the ground zero here was the whole city. Because of that, the military had to abandon the city and destroy all the bridges leading to it. They thought that they could contain the outbreak by trying to isolate it. That was where they were wrong, and the military just ended up trapping the survivors inside the city with nowhere to go. The survivors here managed to hold on for 4 months just by scouring the connected casinos and hotels. But that ended here as their supplies started dwindling. And of course, no one wanted to go to the streets even if they were mutators. It was because, in this city, the mutated infected outnumbered the regular ones. And in their group, there were only 6 of them among the 130 people they had. Running for supplies would not only endanger their lives but would not ensure that they would be able to collect enough for everyone. All that led to this meeting. Among the 6, however, there was someone not paying attention and was looking at the wall for some reason. "Morgan, what are you looking at?" one of the 2 women at the meeting asked the man. "No, it's nothing," Morgan replied. Nevertheless, he was sure that he felt something nostalgic for no apparent reason. Day 126 to 7:22 a.m. Caesars Atlantic City Centurion Towers, Arkansas Avenue, Atlantic City, United States of America. Mark continued to communicate with May through the ring as he flew down to the lower roofs of the orange-colored building. His destination was the next building south of this one. It was because he saw some rooftop park and a bar which looked interesting. A rooftop park with planted trees and bushes were very unusual if one came from the Philippines. It was no wonder that he would be interested in this one. The rooftop was empty. There was no infected either. It was kind of understandable because it was easy for the infected to fall off from the roof. Still, the evidence of the struggle was present in the area. Dried blood stained the floor and walls. There were even chunks of desiccated flesh at some places. The tables and chairs were overturned, the glass walls were shattered. Fortunately, the flora on the rooftop was enough to overshadow the despair left in this place. At the clear side of the park, Mark said, the plants had overgrown. Without maintenance, these trees and plants planted in an unnatural environment should have withered already. Yet, they were still living vigorously and had overgrown. The effect of mutagen on flora was very apparent in this situation. As he landed, Mark noticed a tourist pamphlet that already stuck to the floor. He tried to scrape it off to check, but because of the very long exposure to nature, the paper was already brittle. The pamphlet was torn. However, he was able to read a large part with pages stuck together. Through this pamphlet, he learned where in the world he was currently. After throwing the pamphlet away, Mark noticed webs on the overgrown trees while walking. The newly created webs were rather thick for a regular spider, and each strand was enough to be used to sew new clothes. This meant that whatever that created these webs must be nearby. A mutated infected spider or an evolved spider? Mark could not help but speculate. He then heard a rustling among the trees, which immediately alerted him. And here was the answer, jumping out of the trees while shooting webs at Mark. As Mark sidestepped to dodge the thick, sticky web, he watched the assailant without expression. He was wrong in both assumptions. A cat? Mark murmured as he looked at the bloated creature in front of him. It was a gray fat tabby agilely moving while spitting strings of webs through its mouth. With its swift movements that a regular human would only see a blur, it was questionable to call it fat at all. Ah, I see. Mark realized that it was not a web but might be a string made of fur. This infected cat might have mutated some of its organs to become like this. The cat charged towards Mark while shooting those strings like a regular mindless infected. Thus, with a swing of his blood whip, the cat's body fell with its head off. Looking at the dead body on the floor, Mark could not help but say, "What a weird one." Leaving the body behind, Mark walked off towards the bar. He wanted to look for food as he was kind of hungry now. As it was unexpected that he had to drag the enemy away, he never prepared any food for him to carry. Besides, the food situation of his base was not good either because of the enemies. They could not make any dried goods because of the veil of fog. Disappointingly, the bar was already ransacked. It was kind of expected, but Mark was feeling lazy to go around to search for food. He had just finished a tiring battle. This made him want to relax a bit while he observed the inheritor on the building to the north. Oh, well. Mark shrugged as he decided to find some food in places below. This was a tourist area. There should be a lot of restaurants and stores. Boom! Before Mark could even take flight, a loud explosion was heard from the northwest. It sounded like it was quite far away, but the sound was loud enough to be heard clearly. The explosion made Mark fly up in the sky to see the source. What the F? Mark almost cursed at the sight he saw. He was not able to see it earlier because it was still dark, and he did not pay attention to the residential areas of Atlantic City. Now, however, he was able to see it. The whole highway to the northwest was already scorched along with every building beside it. Looking at the way the establishments looked charred, it was not because of fire but because of something too hot near it. It was like the structures were exposed to smoke for a very long time. The situation was quite strange as the charring of the buildings looked old. And the source of the explosion was a car that was abandoned in the middle of the highway. As for the culprit, it was a bungalow-sized red slug moving across the highway at a slow pace. The slug's body was glowing like magma, releasing smoke every time it breathes. Mark noticed the people on the rooftop of the violet building come out to see the spectacle. They did not seem surprised at the situation, making him realize that it was not new to them. Thus, turning into a black mist, Mark decided to eavesdrop a bit. Asterisk asterisk. It moved again. When was the last time? A female mutator said with a frown. It's been dormant for a week. It's not any different from the previous times. Since that thing appeared, it will move a few blocks for a whole day before sleeping for at least 5 days. Just be glad that it is not moving our way. A male mutator replied. They all watched the spectacle together with other survivors that were interested. As for the others, they could care any less. But then, another mutator seemed uneasy. He was a thin black American, with a generic office worker look. He had an honest and straightforward vibe on him, and with the interaction of the non-mutator survivors with him, it seemed that he was very well liked. The same man then turned serene. Who's there? The man shouted at the blind spot of the rooftop. He then ran towards the place with his Uzi on hand. But when he reached the spot, there was no one there. Morgan, what is wrong? The other people chased up to him with a wary expression. There's nothing here, another survivor said while peeking out. Morgan, don't scare us like that. We're at the rooftop. No one will be able to come here without us knowing. A bulky-bodied mutator tapped Morgan on his shoulder. They all pulled him back amicably. They might have thought that Morgan was playing a joke on them. On the other hand, Morgan was silent. He did not know why, but he was sure that he felt that someone there. Asterisk asterisk. So, he's called Morgan, huh? He's pretty sharp. Mark said with a smile as he looked at the man, who was returning with his group. Unfortunately, Mark could still not tell what ability this person inherited. Although he could feel the inheritors through the crystal, he could not learn whose powers they had unless they used it in front of him at least once. The only exceptions to this were Nia and Alan, who inherited the two closest people in Freed's life. He had a special connection to them, and he would know who they were, even if he did not want to. Leaving the vicinity of the casino hotel, Mark flew towards the giant slug while avoiding the sight of the people back there. And the more he flew, the more they frowned. What the hell is wrong with this city? Mark murmured, while a sizable number of infected tried to chase him from below. The city was brimming with infected. It was not surprising as it was a tourist area. If the wave of infected that happened before also happened here, the number of infected was more acceptable. Still, it did not explain why the ratio of common infected and the mutated ones was tilted the wrong way. The common, regular infected could not be called common at all as he could count more mutated infected roaming the streets. It was more appropriate here to call the mutated infected as the common ones. Fortunately, almost all of Mark encountered on the way so far were all level 1 mutations. If they were all level 3, he would question why that group in the casino hotel was still alive. Nevertheless, the sight on the street would make anyone shiver. There was no way that any survivor would be able to use the roads at all. That survivor group was stuck at the rooftops, there was no doubt in that. Mark also saw some food stores along the way and tried to peek a bit. Almost everything was untouched. This meant that this city was overwhelmed by the infected since the start of the outbreak. There was also one thing that Mark noticed. There were chunks of airplane parts everywhere, and there was even a large cut of a wing stuck at the face of a building. As Mark continued to fly, observing the surroundings, something jumped on the walls of the building, trying to catch onto him. Level 3, Mark murmured as he spun his body, evading an attack from the mutated infected. The infected was a teenaged male, and he was shooting pointed bones from his arms as he chased after Mark. But then, he saw his prey vanish in a puff of smoke. The next thing he knew was that his head flew away as his headless body plopped onto the streets. Mark continued to fly, leaving the horde on the street that started to feed on the dead body of their previous comrade. These guys are starving, aren't they? It was no surprise, though. Not all infected were dead, after all. Along the way, Mark found 2 small infected nests. One was at an apartment building, and one was at a school. For 2 infected nests to exist just 2 blocks away from each other was quite odd in a sense. Nevertheless, Mark did not pay much attention. What he was interested in was that gigantic magma slug. It made him want to call Aphelia here and capture this one. But it seemed to be impossible right now unless he wanted to give up on either Giffer or Logan. Nevertheless, he did not know whether it would worth it. From the discussion of the survivors on that rooftop, this slug was something slow-moving. And it was not suitable to be kept on his base as it might cause a forest fire even without doing anything. As he flew closer to the highway, Mark started to feel the temperature going up. Sure enough, it was something emitted by that gigantic slug. In the end, he was not able to reach the highway at all. The heat was too much to bear. He could only get about 2 blocks before the gigantic slug, and it already felt like his skin was burning. However, not that he was closer, Mark realized something as he observed the gigantic slug. It was nowhere like a common slug that one could see in damp areas. There were flowering coral-like designs on its head and back along with a beautiful pattern on its body. There were holes in its back where it releases smoke, and after it was done, the holes would be sealed with beautifully colored gills. It was a marine gastropod mollusk, a nudibranch. Mark wanted it even more. It was not like a mutated infected at all but something that naturally born of nature. Day 126 to 7:25 a.m. Great Island, Atlantic City Parks Department, North Albany Avenue, Atlantic City, New Jersey, United States of America. The Great Island. It was a large, irregularly shaped island southwest of Atlantic City. Rivers, grass, and trees filled the landscape. A single highway connected the island to both the main island of Atlantic City and the mainland of New Jersey. Inside the island, only 4 establishments were present: an abandoned roadside hotel, a gas station, the Atlantic City Parks Department, and the largest school in Atlantic City, the Atlantic City High School. Currently, while the survivors remaining in Atlantic City thought that the state had abandoned the city, a large group of the U.S. military was stationed here, occupying the Great Island. Unfortunately, their orders did not include the welfare of the survivors. Inside the Atlantic City Parks Department, the military had installed a surveillance system, powered by solar panels and batteries. The whole facility had no problems running. Here, they monitor the current state of Atlantic City and fulfill 2 of the orders given to them. The first order was to study the ecology of the infected, and the second was to monitor the state of the survivor groups left in the area. Each day at a fixed schedule, they launch and retrieve drones that they scattered across the city. There were more than 100 of these drones equipped with the military's latest technology. There were more than 200 drones across the city. The location did not matter whether it was land, air, or water. These drones were not only equipped with silent motors but also had long-distance cameras allowing them to observe the targets without closing into a noticeable distance. Furthermore, these drones were perfect for the job as the infected were not attracted to them except for a few odd ones. They needed to gather as much data about the infected as they could together with the scientists studying them that currently stationed at the high school. At this moment, a military officer with a stern appearance entered the surveillance room early in the morning. "Sir McGuire." The personnel inside the surveillance area immediately stood up and saluted. He was Major Samuel Maguire, the head military officer of this military facility. Known for his strict appearance and conduct, no one who knew him would try to get on his worst side. Nevertheless, he was a very approachable superior to his men and everyone here respected him. Report. Major Maguire signaled his hand to put everyone at ease and asked for the current status report. He was alerted by one of the soldiers in charge of monitoring one of the targets of interest. Sir, specimen NH-528, codename Magma Hill, is on the move again. A soldier with quite a bored expression reported. Hearing that, the major made his way towards the monitor of the bored soldier. On the screen, a sea slug with magma-like body and was spewing hot smoke was present. It slowly made its way through the highway. So, it moved again. Major Maguire voiced. Did it change direction? No, sir. It continued in the same direction after another week of dormancy. If it continued like this, it could be heading in a specific direction. We need to know where it is going. I know, sir. But how long will it take? The bored soldier asked. It was no wonder he had that expression if it was assigned to monitor this creature. Even the major could not blame the soldier since he understood his troubles. According to their records, New Hampshire 528 surfaced from the sea 2 days after the start of the outbreak. It first appeared at the coast near Oscar E. McClinton Waterfront Park with the signs of hot water vapor from the ocean. Since then, it continued to move straight towards the highway at a snail's pace. Not only its movements were slow, but it had long dormancy intervals too. For the 4 months that it appeared, it had not even reached half of the highway it was traversing. Also, because of this, they had to rotate the personnel monitoring the target. Continue monitoring the target. Who knows if it suddenly exhibits changes in its behavior? The major commanded. Yes, sir. The soldier replied with a deadpan expression. Major Maguire then looked around. Where is Andrews? He asked. Private First Class James B. Andrews. He was one of the promising new soldiers among the last batch of graduates that they recruited before the outbreak. Meticulous, observant, and honest. Those 3 traits were something Major Maguire liked about the young man. Because Andrews was good at observing, the major designated him to one of the specimens that were hard to catch. When the major entered this time, however, he did not see Andrews among the people that stood up to salute. Andrews. Sir? He's right there. The nearby soldier pointed at the seemingly empty station that was facing the major. As it looked empty, the soldier stood up from his station and approached the one he pointed. The major immediately followed behind. And there, the major saw a soldier, who was fully concentrated at the monitor on his station. His face was just about 3 inches from the monitor as if he was trying to search for something. Andrews. Hey, Andrews. The soldier called out. What is it? I'm busy. That reply made the soldier shrug as he pointed at the man behind him. Ah, Major. Andrews immediately stood up and saluted. Bam. His chair fell with a loud bang, though. What is happening? You're not always like this. The major asked. Sir, it's about the specimen you told me to watch. Andrews replied with a bitter expression. What happened? Moved towards Andrews' station to see. Even the other soldiers nearby went to see. Sir, look. Andrews pointed at the barely recognizable corpse shown on his monitor. And of course, everyone frowned. What was shown was not only bad for the eyes and stomach, but that was not the issue. The corpse that was on the monitor should be HS-005, codename Jumpshooter. The 5th among the infected that they were monitoring since the start of the outbreak. It might not be the strongest, but it was among the fastest. It could also use its jagged hands with hooked bones to climb and jump across faces of buildings and walls. But that was not its ultimate weapon. It was able to generate projectiles from its fast-growing bones and use it to attack its enemies and prey. The fast-moving predator, however, was now nothing but a leftover of a heavily eaten corpse. Did you see how it died? The major asked. That is the issue, sir. Andrews then switched to a minimized video player, which seemed to be the one he was watching intently earlier. It was a replay of the video feed that was recorded earlier by the drone Andrews was controlling. At the start of the video, the jump shooter was roaming around blindly. But then, a large number of infected was seen running on the opposite street. And then, the target followed the horde. From that onwards, it was clear that Andrews used the drone to immediately chase the target. But with the speed of the jump shooter, the drone had a hard time catching up. The target turned on the corner of the street following the disturbed horde. And when the drone turned at the same corner, all they saw was the head and body of the jump shooter separating from each other. Then, the head vanished while its headless body continued to plummet to the ground. Everyone watching the video frowned. The soldiers could see nothing at all. Then, Andrews switched to a slow-motion playback. There, they saw a black blur that appeared to be a smoke catch the head and flew away. Not content yet, Andrews switched to a still screenshot. There, they could see a blurred silhouette of a person with bat wings reaching for the severed head. Seeing that, the major frowned, but then, he knew what to do. Locate the area and check all the drones around it. We need to know what it was. The major ordered. Yes, sir. With that order, every soldier in the room moved. It was not surprising. One of the targets they were monitoring died for an unknown reason. The silhouette that they saw might be a new threat, and they needed to find it as soon as possible. Huh? A confused voice was heard among the busy people. It immediately took the attention of everyone in the room. And they saw that the source of the voice was that confused-looking soldier that was in charge of the magma hill. Major, look. The bored soldier immediately called to the major. What is it? The major, of course, approached as it could be urgent. But at the monitor, there was nothing but an empty rooftop of the building. Are you fooling with your job right now? Why is your drone focused on an empty rooftop instead of your target? The major said with a reprimanding voice. Sir, no, it's not that. The bored soldier immediately worked on his station, opening and switching screens. And then, the replay of the footage that was only lasted a few seconds was projected on the monitor. And there, they saw a man with tattered clothes standing at the very same location of the empty rooftop earlier. The man was wearing an odd-looking armor, and two swords could be seen on his back. The man seemed to have noticed the drone as he turned his head facing the camera. Then, with a cloud of black smoke, the man vanished. Everyone that saw the video realized that something or someone had appeared in the area of their jurisdiction, and that smoke was totally the same as the one that killed the HS-005. Without a second thought, the major released an order. Everyone assigned to specimens of lower threat level, switch to search protocol. We need to know whether that man is human or not. Release the reserve aerial drones if needed, understood? Yes, sir, and that morning, the monitoring division of the soldiers stationed at the Great Island became busy. Day 126 to 7:34 a.m. Atlantic City, New Jersey, United States of America. Mark stood at a hidden area of another rooftop, away from the one he stood at while watching the gigantic mutated nudibranch. Is that a military drone? He murmured with confusion. Since he did not expect it, he was caught off guard. He was definitely filmed by that drone even just for a few seconds. I was too careless. Mark did not care who that drone belonged to, but it definitely looked like the ones that he saw on a US military documentary before the outbreak. In the first place, he never liked being filmed or taking photos of himself. It was because it felt uncomfortable for him. That was also the reason how he noticed the drone, as he felt the same discomfort. He did not mind being seen, but in the current state of the situation, he did not know who could be watching the video feed of that drone. The person could be connected to Ouroboros or even the eyes. There was no one he could trust here. And it was even doubtful if it was really a drone of the US military. It was because if it was present here, they should be working on evacuating the survivors left here. Now that it crossed his mind, he did not really know anything here at all. It seemed like whether he liked it or not, he should establish contact with the people here. While he was in deep thought, he noticed something. There were more than 100 flying drones now gathering in the area. What the hell is this now? Mark shrugged. It felt like he was some freeman with a crowbar being chased by drones sent by the enemies. With that funny thought, he decided to investigate a bit. Thus, turning into black mist, he flew towards where the drones came from.